In this edition of Sea Power, we'll view a few of the battleships of the 20th century. From their beginning, their refinement, then to their removal in favour of the aircraft carrier. And to close, we'll see one of the grandest in retirement. In the early 1900s, the wealth and status of a nation was directly measured by the size of its battleships. These shots of American ironclads show the state of the art at the turn of the century. The term battleship was a new contrivance to describe the largest, most powerful of these capital ships. The famous Dreadnought was birthed in 1904. However, by this time, technology had also taken to the air. The Texas, patterned after Dreadnought and commissioned in 1914, was the last of the true battleships. For a time, she was considered the most powerful warship afloat because of her 10 14-inch guns in 5 twin turrets. The Texas auspiciously went on to participate in both the First and Second World Wars. In 1914, the Great War saw for the first time huge technological advances in weaponry. One of these advances, the airplane, came to the fore in the war against the early submarines. The dawning of flight required some reappraisal in the uses and threats that these new weapons could pose. At the time, naval stalwarts would not believe that the flimsy fabric and string insects could threaten their battleships, which were built to withstand the fire of other battleships. Battleship construction progressed steadily through the early 1900s. However, in 1922, with construction costs spiralling out of control and threatening to bankrupt countries, the Washington Naval Reduction Treaty was signed to halt the battleship arms race. When the United States signed the treaty, they agreed to halt construction of 13 new battleships and battle cruisers presently under construction. 2 hulls went on to become the largest aircraft carriers in the world, the Lexington and Saratoga. And the rest was scrapped. Aircraft during this time were taken on as a part of the fleet, but only as reconnaissance units. They would be used to find enemy ships and targets, then guide the fleet to within range and allow the big guns to take over, while calling as a spotter the fall of shot. In the years after World War I, military thinking saw the advances that could be made in air warfare. And some far-sighted pundits professed that these new planes would eventually replace the capital ships of nations. By 1920, the battleship was still the authority of naval task forces. Developments had rapidly advanced their weapons and protected coverings with armoured decks and waterline belts protecting them against incoming attacks. If there were to be any threat from the air, the battleship would easily adapt, as it had previously, to these new, as yet unseen dangers. In America in 1921, it was determined to silence the raging debates between the new air arm and the existing naval theorists. A series of tests would be performed to finally qualify the reality of the threat presented by the formative Air Force. Planes would be sent to sink naval shipping from the air. The trial took the form of bombing one ship of each size: a submarine, a destroyer, a cruiser, and finally a battleship. The ships would be attacked successively with bigger and bigger bombs, and inspections would take place after each attack. All armed forces would take turns in the attacks, and the trials would culminate in the big event of the bombing of the battleship Ostfriesland. The war prize Ostfriesland was large at 22,000 tons and was considered to be a significant test of the new theories. As a new ship, it was designed against attack from existing battleships of the day. Tests against Ostfriesland began on July 20, when Navy and Maritime Corps planes dropped 52 bombs on the ship, and ended dramatically the next day when Martin bombers delivered the fatal blow with 11 1,000 and 2,000 pound bombs. Today, the debate rages as to whether the test had any real validity. The targets were all stationary and had no damage control or fire parties. Had they the ability to move and repair damage, the result may have been significantly different. The Ostfriesland itself stayed afloat under sustaining significant damage over a period of a day and a half. Only the final 2,000 pound bomb signalled the end, but even then, she took hours to sink. Over the ensuing years, significant numbers of ageing battleships met the same sad end, while the advancements in naval power and aviation technology continued apace. When the Naval Reduction Treaty came to an end in 1936, the United States then began to build what were to become known as the fast battleships. Speed was now deemed critical to keep up with the new aircraft carriers of the fast carrier attack groups. The early battleships had a top speed of around 22 knots. However, when other navies produced 24-knot battleships and 30-knot battle cruisers, the newer North Carolina and South Dakota class battleships were made capable of 28 knots. And the new Iowa class ships would be capable of speeds in excess of 33 knots. A final class, the Montanas, were to be nearly half again as big as the Iowa class and have a maximum speed of 28 knots. Although authorised and designed, none of this class ever entered construction, as the emphasis shifted to the construction of the aircraft carriers during the Second World War. December 7, 1941. Japan used their combined Pacific Fleet in the infamous Pearl Harbor attack, consisting of 2 fast battleships, 6 aircraft carriers, 8 destroyers, 3 cruisers and submarine escorts, and a total of 360 aircraft. There had never been such an overwhelming force assembled in the Pacific arena. The attack was over in little more than 3 hours. By the end of the day, most of the US Pacific Fleet lay broken and burning. The loss of 5 battleships, Arizona, Oklahoma, California, West Virginia and Nevada, and the damage to the Maryland, Tennessee and Pennsylvania in the raid was a truly devastating blow to the American naval forces in the Pacific. However, the 3 American carriers were not damaged, having been deployed to reinforce advanced bases at Waikiki and Midway. This one fact allowed the remaining forces to hold the Midway-Hawaii front and defend the supply lines to Australia. It would not be until the last great battleship engagement in history, the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October of 1944, that battleships would again play major roles in the Pacific War. 2 Iowa-class battleships, the Iowa and the New Jersey, as well as several old battleships refitted from their damage from the Pearl Harbor attack, would face the Japanese super battleships Yamato and Musashi, and many older ships from the First World War. The fall of the Philippines would be a terrible blow to the Japanese, as it controlled most of the fuel for the fleet. After the Battle of the Philippine Sea, dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by American pilots, Japan had only a handful of planes, and even fewer pilots to man them. so plans were drawn up for a huge naval attack against the US forces. The result would be an all-or-nothing gamble for the Japanese Navy. Nothing was held back. The Japanese 65,000-ton battleship Yamato was built in 1941 at Kure, Japan. She and her sister Musashi were by far the largest battleships ever built, even exceeding in size and gun caliber of the US Navy's cancelled Montana class. Their 9 18.1-inch main battery guns, which fired 3,200-pound armour-piercing shells, were the largest battleship guns ever to go to sea, and the scale of the two ships' armour protection was also unsurpassed. The Musashi was finally lost on the 24th of October during the Leyte Gulf battles. Her extensive protection ultimately failed her after being subjected to 20 torpedo hits, 17 bomb hits, and the destructive force of the detonation of 16 near misses in the water. At about 7:30 in the evening, 4.5 hours after the last attack, she would finally roll over and sink. The Yamato would use its large guns in Leyte against US escort carriers, but she would never fire on her American equivalents. Halsey's fleet of fast battleships sailed ineffectually between the two major engagements of Leyte, unable to participate due to confusion in the messages sent between the individual fleets. And so an era came to a close. The battleship never again fired guns at an enemy ship. And yet, even as the age of the battleship ended, overrun by the power of the aircraft carrier, only the disengagement of the Japanese forces at the last minute saved the day for the Americans at Leyte. The carriers would now become the king of the fleet, and within a year, the war would be over. The Nagato would be the sole Japanese battleship to survive the war. However, after the conflict, she joined her distant cousins, the American battleships Arkansas, New York, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. The Nagato would be sunk at Bikini Atoll, near the German cruiser Prinz Eugen, during the testing of atomic weapons. At the close of the war, however, it was again the grandness of the battleship that was chosen for the formal surrender of the Imperial forces. USS Missouri played host to the cessation of hostilities in the Pacific from the Bay of Tokyo. On September 2, 1945, amid the wreckage of the once proud Japanese fleet, the Missouri transmitted the ceasefire message. And on her foredeck, the signing of the official surrender was confirmed. The Iowa-class ships went on to see active service again in the Korean conflict, and were used for shore bombardment in support of ground troops. Their mere presence and large guns were a huge asset in any conflict. However, with the spiralling costs of running 4 ships, they were all decommissioned by the late 1950s. Due to calls from the Marines, the New Jersey was reactivated for the Vietnam conflict in 1968, but again mothballed in 1969. During the 1980s, all 4 Iowas were recommissioned and significantly modernized. They were all converted to using light diesel fuel, and communications received enormous upgrades. They also received weapons upgrades with the addition of 16 Harpoon anti-shipping missiles and 32 Tomahawk cruise missiles for conventional or nuclear shore attack and enemy shipping. Their large 16-inch guns were maintained, and 6 of their original twin 5-inch guns were also kept. The existing range of the 16-inch guns of 24 miles was nearly doubled with new sub-caliber rounds. The addition of Harpoon missiles for surface-to-surface combatants extended their effectiveness. With a range in excess of 67 nautical miles and surface skimming the water, the Harpoons greatly extended the operational sphere of the Great Ladies. However, it was the addition of the Tomahawk cruise missiles where they again rose in stature during the 1991 Desert Shield operation. With a range of 1,500 miles, these small pilotless planes are incredibly accurate and capable of delivering conventional warheads or nuclear stores. By the mid-90s, though, all of these great battleships had again been decommissioned. 2, Iowa and Wisconsin, were in mothballs. The other 2, Missouri and New Jersey, were serving a new purpose as restored museum pieces and memorials to their great places in history. Today, the US Navy is without an active battleship. However, many of the Grand Ladies are still accessible to the public. One of the greatest of all is the Texas. The battleship Texas is the last dreadnought in existence in the world. A veteran of Vera Cruz and both World Wars. Having been designed in the first decade of the 20th century, and having seen action in some of the most intense and critical campaigns of World War II, she is an important piece of our naval and maritime history. These are Sea Cadets spending a weekend aboard the Texas. These cadets will join over 100 other men and women participating in the annual Battle Stations 1944 event, a recreation of life aboard the Texas during World War II. When the Texas was commissioned in 1914, she was the most powerful weapon on Earth. Today, she is the US's oldest surviving battleship. With a crew of up to 1,800 men living in her 572-foot hull, sailors served their country and made sacrifices in the name of the service and country. The Sea Cadets live all aspects of life on board, including preparing meals, cleaning, and getting used to the confines of life at sea. To many, it leaves a new understanding of the trials and sacrifices made by the men that crewed the Texas.
Hot stuff coming through. See.
May I go get my iced tea?
To those people truly interested in history, it is not enough to read a book about it or watch a film about the Texas. Here you can feel and smell what it was actually like. It's probably as close as you can get to time travel.
Just wipe it down then. Get the finger marks off. It gives them a sense of feel of what it's really like.
Now hear this. Now hear this. All hands, man your battle stations. All hands, man your battle stations.
Alpha Gun, Bravo Gun, man and ready, sir!
Bravo God, man ready, sir!
A portion of each day is set aside for the Living History program, where the general public can come aboard and explore different aspects of the ship. The high point for the reenactors is when the public, especially the children, make the realization that the stories are all true, that the history they've been told is real.
Oh, look at this, guys. You want to see what it's like to get a crew
There's a
back?
lot of symbolism associated with the Texas and what she represents.
And you're going to be madly calling these numbers out, and there'll be 2 or 3 other guys here doing this.
Many of the Sea Cadets did not know what living on board a battleship really entailed before they arrived. But all will leave and be slightly changed by their experiences. As time passes, the cadets will better understand what this ship represents: honor, responsibility, and personal sacrifice. The battleship Texas is a unique teaching tool. Her battle is far from over, as she has a new generation to serve.